the data, the science, and the opportunity that's still out there that we can sort of take advantage of. You know, advertising's full of emotion and full of opinions. So this is this is quite the contrary. If anyone's worked with me in the past, I respect that, but let's look at the facts and let's build our business case based on that. So this presentation is pretty much in two parts. The first part is looking at what's going on right now with consumer spending, with retail turnover, and then the second part's about, okay, what does the science say about advertising, and are there a few little tricks that we can take home pretty much today that we can look to find the opportunity and maybe optimize our communications with what we already see and do. And of course, we're always around to help if you want to engage in a chat beyond today. Thanks, Joe. So what we did at Neuro Insight is we've been collaborating now with a guy called Charlie Nelson, who's the director of 4C Change, for quite a while now. Charlie's brilliant in terms of his ability to pick market turns, to pick the highs and the lows, and to understand in a far deeper way, you know, after you remove the emotion of COVID, what's really going on with consumer spending, and how can we indeed predict what's going to happen and understand what's happening in the current environment. So that's what we've done. This is very much a collaboration between Neuro Insight and 4C Change, looking at consumer spending data and patterns. Thanks, Joe. And there you have it. That's about a 2-year timeline of monthly turnover in what we call retail spending. And actually, as we found, that far right data point, July 2020, you know, we saw a huge uptick in March. We saw the crash in April, which was very, very short-lived. And then May, June, July, 5, 8, and 12.2%. Now, July's growth in retail turnover, as it turns out, is the strongest growth in 20 years. So if you're in a particular category that growth is happening in, actually then back in July was actually one of the best times in the last 10 years to advertise or to hold your nerve and to keep targeting that consumer and actually capitalize. Now, you know, I think the next slide sort of captures exactly what happened during that. You know, there was about, as Charles Woolley said, in terms of you know, the tourism dollar, between all the government stimulus, JobKeeper, maybe if we go back one, Joe, JobKeeper, JobSeeker, access to superannuation and a range of factors, put actually $66 billion into household sort of balance sheets, part of which is saved and part of which is spent. So that's part of the reason why we saw 12.2% huge growth in the June quarter. Thanks, Joe. And yet, at the same time, around about the same time, the AANA and Ipsos commissioned some research back in June with a few hundred advertisers, only to find that half of the advertisers said that they're still waiting for more stability to return before they actually spend. So half the advertisers had money to spend and were sitting on their hands, sort of waiting for more stability to return. And yet we see those quite stunning growth figures. Thanks, Joe. So what I might have just done, I might just get my screen. Yeah. So at the same time when we were having, you know, 12% growth in spend, ad spend at the same time was down 35, you know, 28 to 35%. So a lot of advertisers, unfortunately, left quite a lot of money on the table. I think the key question now is, so what could we have used to understand why people kept spending, and is it actually possible to predict spending patterns? So what I'd like to do is show you the next slide, which is basically a slide that we've collaborated with our friends Charlie Nelson at 4C Change, and it's hard to overestimate the importance of what you're looking at here. What you're looking at here is nearly 20 years of tracking consumer spending on the basis of, if they had $1,000 discretionary, what would they do with it? Would they save it in the blue line? Would they pay off a loan in the red line, or would they spend it? And at the back of last year, in November 2019, as we rounded the corner into 2020, what we found, if you look at that green data, the green line, that willingness to spend by consumers in Australia was actually the highest it's ever been. So all that had to happen was for someone to put money into these consumers' hands, and they would indeed keep spending. And the really interesting thing is that the previous high point was back in November 2008, just before the GFC. And Charlie called that back then and said, we actually won't go into a recession back then, because as you might remember, the government injected a lot of stimulus, nowhere near of what stimulus has actually been injected into the current market now. And sure enough, the economy didn't tank in anywhere near the fashion that people thought it would. And what we've found, the same is happening now. So this is actually, this chart here, I can't emphasize enough. This is the stick of dynamite. If you remember